She talks and talks, and you sit there, pretending to care. You nod, you smile, you even laugh sometimes. But deep inside, you're drained. You're not being heard. You're being held hostage. This isn't connection. It's noise, and is bigger than just too much talking. It's about control, power, energy, and if you don't reclaim it, you'll lose yourself. Comment, I choose peace over noise. Number 1. Stop giving emotional attention. You already know what it feels like. Sitting across from someone who's talking endlessly, circling around problems they created, pulling you deeper into situations you didn't sign up for, expecting your face to show sympathy, your tone to validate, your mind to hold space for the chaos they bring like it's owed, not earned. And the worst part is, you convince yourself that staying silent, staying present, staying supportive is somehow strength. But deep down you feel it, that draining, slow-motion erosion of your mental energy, of your internal peace, of your very identity as a man who once had clarity and purpose, but is now sitting there trapped in a mental maze built by someone else's inability to self-regulate, to self-reflect, to simply stop talking long enough to hear anything but their own voice. And this is the first truth that hits you in the gut. When someone constantly talks without purpose, without pause, without accountability, they aren't connecting. They're performing, and the applause they want isn't loud or public. It's subtle and personal. It's your nodding, your little yeahs, your concerned eyebrows, your leaning in when they pause. It's all of that. And every single reaction you give becomes proof to them that they can keep going, that the emotional faucet doesn't need to shut off, that you're here to absorb, to agree, to offer soft words while they dump every little annoyance in your lap. And let's make this clear. This isn't about being insensitive or cold or mean. It's about waking up to the reality that your presence is being treated like a free emotional dump site, and you've been trained to think that saying nothing is the polite thing to do. But let's strip it back. You're not helping anyone when you allow endless verbal loops to hijack your time, your thoughts, your energy, and your direction, because what begins as tolerance turns into training, and the moment you show that you'll sit through anything just to avoid conflict, you've silently agreed to be the receiver, the soft target, the one whose own thoughts, emotions, and ideas get drowned under the weight of someone else's verbal overload. And it's not accidental. People who overtalk often do it as a method of control, not always consciously, but absolutely consistently, because when someone speaks non-stop and you're not speaking at all, a silent hierarchy is created where they lead and you follow. And if you're not careful, this dynamic bleeds into everything: decisions, priorities, direction, respect, even attraction, because people don't desire what they can dominate. They desire what they can't easily sway. And right now, if you're always available to react, to comfort, to sit through hour-long emotion-driven monologues that go nowhere, you've trained her to believe that your time is less valuable than her emotions, and your energy is less sacred than her opinions. And no matter how many conversations you have, that dynamic won't shift until you make it shift. And that begins with presence, not the kind that listens endlessly, but the kind that observes and filters, the kind that doesn't over-explain or over-engage, the kind that holds eye contact without nodding, that hears without feeding, that watches without absorbing, that resists the bait of every emotional hook dangled in front of you, because attention is energy, and energy is power, and power is respect. And when you give all three away just to be nice, you're not being noble, you're being drained. And every single time you validate a pattern that should be interrupted, you tell the world you're okay with chaos as long as it comes dressed as conversation. And if this feels uncomfortable to hear, good. That's where transformation begins, when you get real about how much of your attention is spent managing someone else's emotional state, while your own stays neglected. And don't get it twisted. Emotional availability isn't the goal here. It's emotional mastery. Not being triggered, not being baited, not being puppeted into responses that only serve someone else's need to feel powerful in a moment they refuse to face themselves in silence. Because if you always show up to comfort noise, you'll never build peace, and peace is where power lives. So here's the shift. Stop reacting. Stop nodding. Stop helping the loop continue. Start filtering. Start responding only when there's direction. Start making your presence felt through clarity, not compliance. Because when you do that, when your face shows nothing, when your words are measured, when your tone says, "I'm listening, but I'm not available for chaos," the whole energy changes. The performance stops, or it escalates. But either way, you see it for what it is. An attempt to pull you into noise you didn't ask for. And when you can hold your ground in that moment, when you stop giving the kind of attention that rewards disorder, you create space for clarity to return, not just to them, but to yourself. And the result, you stop being the soft spot to dump on, and you become the standard they have to rise to meet. And that right there is when the real conversation begins, not just with her, but with yourself. And if this hits you deeply, if you know you've been giving away your energy too freely, staying quiet when you should have stood firm, then it's time to go deeper, because surface-level change won't shift the patterns that have held you back for years. That's why I created the Stoic Relationship Blueprint, a powerful guide built for men who are done being drained, done being confused, and ready to step into clarity, control, and calm. This isn't just a book, it's a code, filled with timeless Stoic principles designed to instantly shift how you think, how you lead, and how you handle every dynamic in your life. And now it's available in audiobook form, so you can listen to the words that will reshape your mindset while you walk, jog, train, drive. Wherever you are, the blueprint goes with you. You'll never lose it. Once it's yours forever. Unlimited access to the clarity you've been searching for. So ask yourself, how much longer will you keep repeating these cycles? How many hours have you lost in conversations that never respected your presence? How different would your life be if you had this knowledge in your pocket every time you needed it? Click the link in the comments and make this the moment it all changes. Number 2. Disengage without explaining. The biggest mistake you keep making is thinking you owe a speech for every boundary you set, that in order to protect your peace, you must first convince someone else why it's justified. And so you enter this endless cycle where every time you try to create space, you end up debating the very right to your own sanity, like it's something that has to be earned. And what you haven't realized is that explaining yourself in these moments doesn't bring peace. It invites more noise. Because when you're dealing with someone who talks too much, who thrives in the chaos of circular communication, the moment you open your mouth to clarify your intention, you feed the very fire you're trying to escape, because explanations to the wrong person are like keys to someone who never respected the lock in the first place. And if that's hard to hear, good, because this is the part no one tells you. You've been conditioned to believe that boundaries without reasons are rude, that silence without an excuse is cruel, but it's not. It's clarity. And what you need more than anything right now is the ability to detach without feeling guilty, to walk away without holding someone's emotional hand through your exit. Because every time you say, "I just need a second," or "Can we talk later?" or "I'm overwhelmed right now," what you're really doing is opening the door for them to challenge it, to flip the situation, to say, "So I'm too much for you," or "Wow, now you're shutting me down." And just like that, you're no longer walking away. You're being pulled back in, defending, justifying, bending over backward to explain a decision that should have been non-negotiable from the start. And it's deeper than the moment. It's about how you see yourself. Because if you saw your time and energy as sacred, You wouldn't feel the need to get permission to protect it, and if you had real internal grounding, you wouldn't explain your exit. You'd be the exit, calm, certain, unbothered, and done. And this is what Stoicism teaches when applied correctly. Not to shut off emotions, but to lead them, to put yourself in the driver's seat of your own reactions, to decide when you're done and leave without slamming doors or raising voices. Because the person who truly has power doesn't make a show of it. They just move different. They don't argue. They act. And if you're the type who waits for the situation to explode before you take space, that's not strength, that's survival. And it means you've been giving people way too much access to you for way too long. And the truth is, if you've been around someone who talks over you, interrupts, goes on endless emotional rants, circles the same conversation over and over without resolution, then deep down you already know that staying and explaining won't change a thing. It will only extend the performance, and this is where the shift must happen. You stop trying to be understood, and you start standing on your truth, not yelling it, not defending it, just owning it, without commentary, without drama, without care for whether it's accepted or not, because when you walk away quietly, it's loud in a way that explanations never are, and they'll feel it. Not because you told them how serious you are, but because for the first time you didn't, and that silence, that calm exit, that decision not to engage, it hits harder than any monologue ever could. But it only works if you mean it, if you don't double back 10 minutes later with a half apology, or a new version of your boundary wrapped in softer words. Because if you say you need space, and then come back early just to check how they're feeling about it, you've undone the lesson, you've shown your detachment was fake, and now they know that with enough guilt, enough noise, enough pressure, they can reel you back in. And that's not leadership, that's emotional submission. And every time you do it, you lose a little more self-respect. And self-respect isn't built by how loud you can get when you're angry. It's built by how still you can be when everything inside you wants to react but you don't. When your boundary is crossed and you simply leave. When your space is violated and you simply stop giving access. No shouting, no essays, no emotional speeches. Just quiet decisions that reshape the entire dynamic. And yes, they'll test you, they'll provoke, they'll bait, because you're breaking a pattern they benefited from, and they won't like it. But that's the point. If they liked your boundaries, they were never real. And if your distance doesn't shake them a little, it was never powerful. So stop apologizing for clarity. Stop translating your peace into a language they approve of. Stop explaining the decisions that protect your soul, because your sanity isn't a group discussion. It's a personal responsibility, and the more you act like you need permission to disconnect, the longer you'll stay trapped in cycles you were born to outgrow, and the day you finally walk out without saying a word, without anger, without anything to prove, just still, grounded, certain, that's the day they'll realize you've changed, not because you said it, but because you showed it, and that's when everything starts to shift. Number 3. Make her earn your focus. Your attention isn't free, your energy isn't endless, and your presence isn't owed just because someone demands it. But somewhere along the way, you were convinced that to be good, to be kind, to be available, you had to give it all anyway, and now you find yourself in conversations that aren't conversations at all. They're emotional performances where one person monologues and the other plays the role of the silent audience, expected to react on cue, nod at the right beats, agree with the right outrage, and absorb the emotional weight of words that go nowhere and fix nothing. And the deeper truth that no one wants to say out loud is this. If someone truly respected your mind, your goals, your direction, they wouldn't see your attention as an open tab to run wild with every scattered thought, complaint, or projection they have. They'd treat it like gold. They'd come to it with structure, with purpose, with mutual curiosity. But when they don't, when they talk endlessly without checking if you're even present, when they flood your mind with chaos and call it connection, what they're actually doing is testing your self-respect, and the longer you sit through it silently, the more you train them to believe that your focus has no price, and that belief spreads. It doesn't stay isolated. It leaks into how they speak to you, how they plan with you, how they prioritize you. Because if your mind is available for any noise at any hour with no limits, then why would they think your time, your vision, your standards, or your values have any edge or weight either? And now you're living out a pattern where you're emotionally exhausted, but afraid to say so, afraid to cut them off mid-sentence, afraid to redirect or to say no without packaging it inside politeness. And every time you avoid that confrontation, you sell your peace for cheap. You pretend you're strong because you didn't yell, but real strength isn't about silence. It's about selectivity. It's about filtering what you allow in your mind, the same way you'd protect your home from an intruder. And the reason you're so tired isn't just because they talk too much. It's because you never decided what deserves your focus. You never set the standard for what earns your full mental presence. So now everyone gets it, even when they haven't earned it, even when they're talking in circles, even when they're dragging you into the same emotional maze for the 5th time this week. And it has to stop, because your focus is your future, and what you lock it onto determines what you build, what you believe, what you become. And right now it's scattered. It's being pulled by someone else's instability, by their unfiltered emotions, by their lack of self-awareness, and you have to take it back. And not just with words, not just with a one-time "I'm busy" text, but with consistent action, with posture, with energy that says, if this conversation isn't clear, calm and constructive, it doesn't get my attention. And when you hold that standard, when you calmly let them know, you've been talking for 15 minutes and nothing's been said, or I value peace, let's pause this, or even just stand up and go do something productive, you're not being cold, you're being clear, and clarity is what ends emotional chaos. Because someone who talks endlessly doesn't need more validation. They need a boundary, and if they can't respect your attention, they don't deserve it. And yes, they'll get defensive. They'll say you're being distant. They'll accuse you of being controlling. But don't fold, because what you're doing is correcting a dynamic that was never healthy in the first place. A dynamic where they speak to feel powerful and you stay quiet to feel safe. And that ends the moment you decide your focus is earned, not donated. And to the man listening right now who's stuck in a relationship where every conversation drains him, where every evening feels like an emotional hostage situation, where he can't even hear his own thoughts without someone else's voice layered on top of them. It's not your job to fix their chaos. It's your job to stop letting it into your mind. Because your mind was built to build something, not to carry the weight of someone else's inability to be still. And the irony is, the moment you start requiring people to earn your focus, to slow down, to speak with intention, to actually care whether you're even mentally present, that's the moment they'll either level up or leave, and either way, you win, because the ones who respect your energy will match it, and the ones who don't will remove themselves. And now you've created space for real connection, for conversations that actually matter, for dialogue where both people feel heard and no one is being used as a sounding board for unresolved emotional tension. And that is the beginning of a life where you don't just survive relationships, you lead them, not by force, not by manipulation, but by being so rooted in what your focus is worth, that only those who truly value it ever get close enough to receive it. Number 4. Set verbal boundaries. You think you're being polite when you let it slide, when she talks over you, when the topic spirals into 10 unrelated issues, when she brings up drama from last week in the middle of a conversation you were trying to keep focused. And in that moment you tell yourself you're avoiding conflict, that staying quiet is easier, that if you just let her finish, Maybe this time she'll run out of things to say. But she never does, because you haven't set a single verbal boundary, and every time you sit through it, you train her to believe that chaos has no consequence, and if you don't speak up early, the problem isn't her talking too much. It's you never stopping it when it begins, and no one tells you this. But leadership starts with language, not volume, not threats, not raised eyebrows. Language. Calm, direct, firm. Words that are short and sharp and carry meaning, not explanations, not excuses, not padded with soft phrases to make her feel more comfortable about your standards, because boundaries that make everyone feel good are not boundaries, they're compromises, and what you're compromising is your clarity, your energy, your time, and your authority in the relationship. And if you're in a situation where every conversation turns into a rant, where your partner talks endlessly, interrupts, over-explains, accuses, and loops back to past problems every time you try to discuss something present, then this is where you start. With a sentence, with one sentence that changes the entire dynamic. Something like, let's stay on track, or we've already talked about this, or I'm not going to continue if we can't speak clearly, and it doesn't have to be emotional. It doesn't need tone, it needs finality, it needs to land and then be followed by action, not another debate. Because here's the reality most men ignore. The longer you delay setting boundaries, the harder they are to introduce, because people adjust to what they can get away with. And once you've shown you'll sit through 30-minute monologues, you've set the price of your peace at 0, and when you finally do speak up, they'll say you've changed. They'll accuse you of being cold, distant, not like before, and that's because they were benefiting from the version of you that never said anything, and now they're uncomfortable, but that's not your responsibility to fix. Your responsibility is to protect the space where real connection can happen, and real connection needs structure, and structure needs rules, and rules need to be spoken clearly, early, and without apology. And this is where Stoic self-leadership comes in, because when you stop trying to manage how they feel about your boundary and start focusing on how you hold it, everything changes. Because when you say something like, we're not going to keep repeating this, and then you actually end the conversation when it starts going in circles, you teach through action, and that action carries weight. And if you say, let's finish this in 10 minutes, and then actually stop engaging at the 10-minute mark, you're no longer negotiating. You're demonstrating, and people don't respect what you say. They respect what you follow through on. And that's the piece that most of you miss. You think speaking your boundary is enough, but if it's not enforced, it's just noise. And the person on the other end knows it, and they'll test it over and over, especially if they've been trained that your boundaries are bendable, soft, flexible, and optional, depending on their mood. But the moment you stop bending, the moment you start saying less and acting more, that's the moment the entire relationship dynamic gets reset, not because you forced anything, but because your energy has become non-negotiable. And let's not sugarcoat this. She won't like it, especially if she's been allowed to run the tempo of every conversation for months or years. But discomfort isn't cruelty. Discomfort is correction, and you can either correct the dynamic now or resent her for it later. But either way, you pay. So why not pay up front in clarity instead of paying in long-term emotional exhaustion? And to the man listening right now who's afraid to set verbal boundaries because he thinks she'll leave, she might. And that would be the clearest sign that she never respected you to begin with, because someone who values you will adjust, and someone who just values what you do for them will resist, complain, and blame you for having standards. But those aren't the people you build with. Those are the people you outgrow, and your verbal boundaries are the first step to knowing which one she is. So start now, and don't make it a big thing. Just a sentence, a decision, and the courage to follow through, because once your words start aligning with your energy, once your standards become sentences that don't shake when challenged, You'll be shocked how fast the noise around you starts to quiet down, not because the world changed, but because you did. Number 5. Walk out without anger. Most people think walking away is weakness, that leaving a conversation unfinished means you've lost, that not arguing your point to the end makes you passive, when in reality the most powerful move a man can make is to leave the room without defending himself, without raising his voice, without dragging the chaos with him. And the reason it feels hard is because you've been trained to believe that your value is tied to your willingness to stay, to explain, to endure, to fix, to sit through emotional spirals that go nowhere, hoping that maybe this time something will change. But nothing does, and you know it, because you've lived it. The same conversations on loop, the same arguments dressed in different words, the same emotional patterns that always end the same way, and deep down you feel it. That weight, that draining heaviness that comes from knowing you should have walked away 20 minutes ago, 2 hours ago, 2 years ago, but didn't, because you thought staying made you strong. But here's the truth that will hit you like a cold wave if you let it. The man who stays in places that disrespect his peace isn't strong. He's scared. Scared of being misunderstood, scared of being blamed, scared of being alone. And that fear becomes the leash that keeps you in environments you've outgrown. And the longer you stay, the more you lose. Not just your energy, not just your time, but your edge, your confidence, your ability to act without needing emotional permission from people who benefit from your silence. And the shift begins when you understand this. Your exit is not a reaction. It's a message. It's a signal that you've elevated beyond the noise, that you no longer dance to the rhythm of emotional instability, that your standard isn't up for discussion, and walking out without anger is the ultimate expression of that standard. Because when you leave without yelling, without slamming the door, without making it a dramatic performance, you communicate something far deeper than rage ever could. You show that you are in control of yourself, and that control is intimidating to anyone who was counting on your reaction to keep their dysfunction alive, because the person who thrives on emotional chaos depends on your engagement to fuel it. And when you don't engage, when you calmly exit, when you walk out not to punish but to preserve, they feel it. Not because you told them you're done, but because you finally acted like it, and they won't understand it at first. They'll say you're cold, that you're running, that you're avoidant, because when someone's used to access without accountability, your boundary feels like rejection, and when someone's used to controlling the tempo of every emotional exchange, your silence feels like abandonment. But it's not your job to manage how they interpret your peace. It's your job to live it, to protect it, to walk in it without apologizing for it. And that begins when you stop making your boundaries a performance and start making them a practice. When you walk out of conversations that aren't rooted in mutual respect. When you step away from energy that drains instead of builds. And most importantly, when you do it without emotion. Not because you're numb, but because you've finally realized that your energy is not up for negotiation, and that anyone who respects you won't need you to burn yourself out just to prove it. And the deeper truth is this: the person who can walk away without anger is the person who doesn't need to control the outcome, who doesn't need to win the argument, who doesn't need to be understood in the moment, because they're not living for validation, they're living by principle. And principles don't shake under pressure. They don't rise and fall based on who's yelling or crying or accusing. They stand still, and that stillness becomes your compass. So the next time you feel the conversation escalating, when the tone gets sharp, when the volume rises, when the direction goes off the rails, and you're being baited into a reaction that doesn't align with who you are, pause, breathe, and ask yourself a simple question: do I need to be right, or do I need to be free? Because most of the time you're arguing with someone who's not listening to understand. They're listening to respond, to twist, to redirect, to trap you into another 45 minutes of circular logic that gets you nowhere and leaves you depleted. And in those moments, the most powerful answer is no answer. The most dominant move is distance, and the most respected posture is calm departure. And yes, it will be uncomfortable the first few times. Yes, they might follow you, they might push harder, they might text you paragraphs or say things to try to pull you back in. But every time you choose stillness over reaction, every time you choose distance over drama, you build a new reputation, not just with them, with yourself, and that reputation becomes identity, and that identity becomes your peace. So walk away when it's time and don't explain it, don't perform it, just go. Because the man who knows his value doesn't argue to be seen. He chooses to disappear when respect is no longer in the room. If you're tired of being the emotional sponge, tired of being silenced in conversations you never asked for, tired of pretending to be okay while your time and energy get drained, then this is the moment everything shifts. Society doesn't want you to have this knowledge. They want you weak, confused, passive. But the Stoic relationship blueprint is the exact opposite of what they want you to see. It's bold, unapologetic, and built for men who are done losing years to emotional chaos. It's now available in audiobook format, so you can listen while walking, jogging, training, driving, and every time you hit play, it builds you. This book doesn't just teach, it reprograms. It's filled with timeless Stoic principles that will transform your life immediately, and once you have it, it's yours forever. No more excuses, no more confusion, just clarity, control, and power in your relationships and in yourself. The link's in the comments. Grab it now before it disappears. And if you're truly ready, comment, "No more wasted years," like this video, and subscribe, not just for you, but to help more men break out of the noise and finally come home to themselves.